So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario, this one made by Horton. It's been quite a while actually since we've seen a Horton scenario. It seemed to have been, well, it was at one point a real fixture on the channel, but ever since life has seemingly gotten busier for pretty much everyone involved with what Reforged was back then, it has become more and more scarce. In fact, I think the last time I showed a Horton scenario was also there was also a big gap in between the last one and this one. Irregardless of that, we will finally get to be able to see another one here. And as with the usual thing with Horton style, it is going to be the orcs that are going to be exclusively on the attack, and it's going to be a combination of the Numenorians and the elves that are on the defence. Now, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous about this, because these scenarios always did seem to be a little bit more taxing on my system than most, and that is mainly because, generally speaking, it's on the maximum level of unit models that you can have on the field, and with all the attackers being orcs and with plenty of choke points, it often meant that there was large, very large engagements, you know, the largest that Medieval 2 can support, really. So we shall see if that's going to be the case this time. I do kind of hope that it is, because it, you know, would fit in with the style of scenario that Horton has made in the past. But it does also mean that there's a higher potential perhaps for mechanical maladies than there would otherwise be. But this is going to be a relatively simple scenario in many ways, although I would say that this is going to be more of a survival type scenario, because it's going to be very difficult for the defenders to win this, and that is by design. Not impossible, I would say. I don't believe I know the outcome of this scenario, but it's going to be difficult for the defenders to win this. Not impossible, but for the most part, the first objective for them should be just getting as many kills as they possibly can. If they can somehow manage to squeak out a win from this one, then it will be a bit of a bonus, because this is intended to be more of an ambush type scenario, where the defenders have been caught unawares and they've had to post up very quickly on this terrain over here and ready themselves for an attack from, presumably, overwhelming force. We shall go through the orcish attackers first and foremost, starting off with DF Morris, another newer scenario creator than Horton, but he has been a little bit more active as of late. He is going to be playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, always a really useful faction to have on the attack, I find, because while they are certainly the most numbers and least quality focused faction in the game as it stands, those numbers are so useful, especially when you're in a 5v3 like this, because it just gives you that leverage you need over the defenders. And it's not as if the Misty Mountains are completely without merit in melee either. This is a very good example of that. The heavy goblin spears, they're decently tanky for a unit of their cost, because they have a half-decent shield value. Their armour is not completely non-existent, and the fact they have armour piercing as well really adds into their all-around decent nature as a unit, to be honest with you, as well as the anti-cavalry bonus that of course comes with being a spear unit. Now naturally they're going to get absolutely destroyed by heavy Numenorian and Elven infantry in a one-on-one melee fight, but it's not going to be a one-on-one, far from it, and that's where the attackers can really try and make their numbers pay. Heavy Goblin infantry are a little bit different. They are even cheaper than the heavy Goblin spears, and the reason for that is they are very much they're kind of just above a fodder unit, to be honest. Like, they have better armour and they are slightly better in melee than stuff like Goblin infantry and the like, but ultimately, at the end of the day, they are still a lower end line infantry unit, to be sure. But look how many of them there are. 253 per unit. The Mountain Coast are a step up. They are more akin to what you would expect to see in terms of effectiveness from something like Uruk-hai infantry. So if you do want to go in for a little bit more of a solid Misty Mountains army, this is what you want to do. 200 Mountain Coast per unit. I get the feeling that Horton's been fiddling around with some of the unit scaling here, because even on the biggest unit scaling, I do not believe the Mountain Coast have 200 per unit. That is a significant amount of Mountain Coast, and it just plays into the fact that the defenders are going to have it all to do here if they are to outright win. We also have still the heavy Goblin infantry, which do have the standard amount. Another 200 Mountain Coast there. Only melee units so far, although I do believe the basic Goblin archers can hide, so there may be a couple of them at the very least. Black Uruks of the Mountains, who do have the standard amount, I believe, 203. Or do they? I think 153 is actually meant to be the standard amount of Black Uruks of the Mountains, is it not? Maybe I'm just remembering things a little bit wrong. But the Black Uruks of the Mountains, they'll be able to go toe-to-toe a little bit more easily with some of the higher skill units like the Elves. They will still lose one-on-one, of course, but they won't get beaten quite so savagely as the heavy goblins in front of them. White Uruk Fearmongers, as the battle gets more and more stretched, and things are getting a little bit more depleted on both sides, something like the White Orc Fearmongers could make all the difference in the world, especially against the Numenorians, where the armor piercing will be really, really useful. The Elves of Imladris do have the melee defense to back their armor up and makes them overall defensively the best faction in the game, perhaps. But even so, the armor piercing will still be useful against them, at least in some capacity. And then some Goblin King's Bodyguard here at the back, which is of course where DF Morris's general is going to be. Here, in and amongst the Orcish encampment, which is where the frame rate seems to be taking a bit of a dive, which is a little bit strange, but good thing for us, the battle won't be taking place over here. The Womb Raider is going to be playing as the Witch Realm of Angmar. The Angmar Marauders are not too dissimilar to the Heavy Goblin Infantry. Main difference being is they are slightly better individually in melee, but there aren't as many of them, so actually, in my opinion, they're not quite as good. But still, just pure numbers is always going to be useful for the defenders in a situation, or for the attackers I should say, in a situation like this, as are the Blackwatch Legion, because it's going to be a long and winding road up that hill for the attackers, so the choice of when to use the Blackwatch Legion exactly is going to be extremely key. If they're used at the wrong time, they won't be all that effective. If they're used at the right time, it could be the thing which completely breaks the defenders. We'll have to wait and see. Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, again, if they're used on the right target at the right time, they could be really decisive, but even with the armor upgraders they have here, Elven Archers, Numenorian Archers, it's going to be tough for them to get into place and get a really good shot, especially the terrain being what it is. Guardians of Kharndoom will be useful though, because they'll be able to withstand quite a lot of punishment, even from the Elven Archers to be honest, with those big shields. Yet more Angmar Marauders, Angmar Halberds, which again, they are a very basic unit in comparison to the White Orc Fearmongers we've already seen. The same principle does apply, albeit to a lesser extent. Armor-piercing phalanx could be very useful in the later game against the Numenorians, but I have a feeling they'll be committed far sooner, in which case they'll really just be a pincushion for arrows. Guardians of Kharndoom, both unupgraded and upgraded. The Witch Realm Blackguard, a mighty unit indeed, which in a situation like this, when they're committed perhaps later on, or even perhaps earlier on, with the multiple HP that they have, shield value, good armor, very useful unit to have in this situation. It feels like it's been a while since we've seen Angmar, but I do have to say I really like the Witch Realm Blackguard's look, the homage to the Witch King, their master, that they pay with their armor. Trolls of Angmar and some more Guardians of Kharndoom. Moving on outside of the encampment that Angmar occupy, we have another Misty Mountains army, this one by Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. Real who's who of scenario creators this, it would appear. Plenty of units of heavy goblin infantry on the front line. Again, Misty Mountains doing what they do best and dying for the cause in droves by the looks of things based on their compositions here. Again, 200 Mountain Orc host per unit, 203 Black Orcs of the Mountains. These are really substantial Misty Mountains armies just in terms of pure numbers. Heavy Goblin Spears back over here, another unit of Goblin King's Bodyguard. The Cave Trolls, which can be used in much the same way as the Blackwatch Legion, albeit just to punch through a line. They can't really leave the same kind of gap as the Blackwatch Legion because there are fewer of them, and even though they are bigger, 153 orcs can make a pretty substantial gap in a line, whereas the Trolls tend to punch through individually. But if there is a unit of exposed archers and the like, again, timing is everything with a unit that pushes through with sheer mass. And a unit of Heavy Goblin Halberds, which are pretty much identical in terms of function to the Angmar Halberds. The differences in stats when it comes to a unit of this level are so small that it's not really worth remarking on. Back over here, another Angmar army, again under the command of Froggy, another individual who has been making scenarios as of late. In fact, the last battle I posted up should have been a Froggy scenario, I believe. Upgraded Guardians of Kharndoom, we have some Angmar Marauders once again, not too dissimilar to what we've already seen. A Catapult, which, I mean, the terrain is so severe that the defenders can try and mitigate it through elevation, which is something which is quite rare. Having said that, the Catapult could still be an incredibly useful thing for breaking up the front lines that the defenders produce. Blackwatch Legion, Scourge Raiders, Guardians of Kharndoom, we've got the Trolls of Gundabad here, the mace-wielding ones, as well as the Trolls of Angmar once again with those metal shards on their wrists. Witch Realm Blackguard, a unit of really deadly Witch Realm Hammerguard, which the armor piercing will be incredibly handy against the Numenorians once again. Again, even against the Elves, but the Elves at the high end have got the right answers to this. To be fair, so have Numenor with stuff like the Pharism Swordmasters, because the sheer melee defense that they offer as well as the third hit point could be really decisive, but we're talking about bodyguard versus bodyguard, which is really unlikely to happen in a vacuum in this kind of battle situation, to be fair, so the Witch Realm Hammerguard, if they're used at the right time, will be very effective. Upgraded Witch Realm Pikemen, pikes in the late game could be the sort of thing to send the attackers over the top, and then finally, for the attackers, we have another Misty Mountains army played by Joran. He's got some heavy goblin infantry. Again, the White Fearmongers and Mountain Uruk Coast. There's such a substantial amount of Mountain Uruk Coast on the field today, which, while they may not be as elite as certain other units on the field, the fact that they are on a level with the Uruk-hai infantry should tell you that this is a pretty tall order for the defenders to go on to win this. Heavy goblin infantry, another unit of heavy goblin infantry, Mountain Uruk Coast. The Drake Broodlings, which can be used as the kind of mass-pushing battering ram that the cave trolls can be. But they're a weird kind of unit, and we'll just wait and see how they're used in this battle before I give my assessment on them, because, again, they can be such a changeable kind of thing. The Orc Mangonel, showering fire down upon the enemy lines. Does the elevation make that more difficult to do? Most certainly. But it could be so useful again. The Mangonel is such an unpredictable tool, much like the Drake Broodlings. The Misty Mountains have got a couple of those in their roster. You could even say the Cave Trolls are that when they're used, but I feel like you've got a little bit more control over the Cave Trolls, purely because when you choose to commit them will determine their effectiveness, whereas there's a bit more of random chance involved with the Drake Broodlings, and especially with the Mangonel. A couple of units of Black Uruks of the Mountains, and then a final unit of Goblin King's Bodyguard. Now, onwards to the defenders, dug in on their mountaintop as they are, starting off with Mevin playing as Umbar. So the Balagaya footmen are going to be making up the first line. They've got the armour upgrade as well they will need. Balakith shield bearers in position with the armour upgrade as well. They'll be pretty good against pretty much anything the orcs throw at them. There will be certain units which can out-quality them, however, so that is something to bear in mind. Balagaya pikemen to try and anchor them in. When it comes to the pure skirmish, the long-range skirmish, the attackers have really got no recourse other than to try and attack with overwhelming force, because between Umbar, Numenor and Imladris, the long-range game on this elevation is going to be so heavily in favour of the defenders. You're going to have to be aggressive, which is perhaps why it's a 5v3 involving tons and tons of units, and we're seeing 33,000 frames, which is fairly reasonable, to be honest. I think the attackers are going to have to be aggressive. Naru Royal Guard, though, will be hoping to do as much damage as they possibly can before inevitably running out of ammunition and having to go into melee as line-holding spears. Corsair Blackguards will do the same. There's also a unit of catapult over here with the Southrons manning it. It is interesting, you'd imagine the Numenorians would be better at manning such machinery than the Southrons, but perhaps they see it as beneath them and they want to be in glorious melee combat, while the Southrons do the dirty work of manning the artillery pieces and doing the mechanics. But the catapult's going to be absolutely vital if the defenders are going to be winning here, because there will be large blob fights forming and the catapult can really help swing things in those kind of situations. Naru Sentinels holding the line, especially late on, could be unbeatable really. There's probably a few more units hidden amongst the trees there, but you'll have to wait and see on that. Horton himself, the scenario creator, big thank you to him for sending me this battle replay to show off, is going to be playing as Numenor at the hill's summit. Numenorian Shield Guard, there's Cohort in there, another unit of Naru Sentinels clad in Numenor's navy, or deep blue I should say, not navy blue. We've got the Balagaya Archers. Trebuchet, I mean the Trebuchet is even more damaging, but it is less ammunition, so we'll have to wait and see if he uses it correctly. Numenorian Cohort, Numenorian Steel Bows, once again, more damaging than other heavy archers, but less ammunition. Armor piercing as well though, so choice of target could be vital there. Alcarondas Legion, the Numenor variant of the Alcarondas Legion, which is a custom scenario only unit. You do get to see them occasionally with the Numenor colours. They're not something you can bring in standard battles, but it's neat to see them once more. And then finally at the top of the hill, more Shield Guard and Pikes. Royal Legion of Armenelos, the mighty Pharazim Swordmasters, more Cohort, 2 units of Royal Legion of Armenelos, Steel Bows over here, and another unit of Naru Royal Guard. Finally, last but not least, we will be seeing the Elves once again in this battle, played by RH Master Blaster. Got some upgraded Imladris Guardians. Real who's who of heavy infantry powerhouses this. The only ones missing really are the Dwarves, but we may see them soon as well. Not in this battle, but in a future one. Another unit of Pharazim Swordmasters here from the Numenorians, actually, with another unit of Numenorian Cohort, more Cohort, Balagaya Pikes and Archers. Getting into the meat and potatoes of the Elven army though. Upgraded Archers of Rivendell, but we also have plenty of Elder Renway, a couple of units of Elder Renway Archers there. Elder Renway Swordmasters and Spearmen, not too surprising to see many of the upper echelon of the High Elves joining the field today. A unit of Elder Renway Swordmasters. Spears of Rivendell, which are armour piercing as I have learned. I still don't rate them too much as a unit, but they have a role to play in this situation, certainly, where they can dig in and hope that the enemy archers are dealt with by their fellows. Noratino warriors, for example, good at range, but what really sets them apart is the fact they're pretty good in melee as well, which is the reason why you pick them over the archers of Rivendell. Another unit of spears of Rivendell there. And once again, I think we're going to have to wait until the battle actually gets underway to see more of the Elven army, because there's bound to be more of it hidden underneath the trees. In fact, there's Gwythi Arthand and Gwythi Myrdain that we can see are hidden. It's going to take a little while for the attackers to get into position, so I'll make a little cut, but we'll rejoin when the orcs are marching upon the hill which the Numenorians and the elves have occupied. So here we go then, a grazing blow on this unit of heavy goblin infantry as it moves forward from the trebuchet, which you can just about see the armor on the top of the hill there, as Horton is going to be opening up on the goblins as they move forward. Probably would be significantly better off trying to thin out the ranks of some of these units of Mountain Uruk hosts. They are a significantly bigger problem than all of the heavy goblins that will be littering the field. Certainly the defenders will have no issues whatsoever in beating them in terms of quality, but the Mountain Uruk host will be a little bit more substantial. Speaking of which, the Gundabad Guard here, the heavier Angmar spears, taking a little bit of damage, but they are all in loose formation, which is going to serve all of the attacking armies quite well here. This army going to be going around this way. It's quite a steep path up. You have to imagine that the fatigue is going to be pretty significant for Morris's Misty Mountains army, but it is also going to be a small section of the Umbar force which is going to have to try and block their way. I say small, that's quite a lot of Umbar heavy infantry, but even so, this terrain is not quite simple as it first looks. Plenty of pathways in and around the hill, so the defenders are going to have to keep a good eye on all of the possible pathways that they can take up here. Bevan's catapult is also still here. Naran and Ira Royal Guard, I'm not entirely sure what's happening over here still. Joran is going to be very slowly but surely making his way around this way towards this pathway which cuts through, and then he will have to go right up against the red line here and ultimately be the one to attack the Imladris side of the hill. It's not an overtly long battle this though, considering the lay of the land, considering that it is a very good defensible position that they have, and considering there is a little way for some of the attackers anyway to still march. But I suppose that does also come about from the fact that the attackers cannot take the slow approach. They cannot skirmish with the enemy as such because they don't really have any ranged units to their name. It is going to be all about their pure numbers and martial might in melee, of which a few more of the Mountain Uruk coast do fall by the wayside. The trebuchet not getting tons and tons of kills here, but it is at least making some dents in the vast amount of orcs and goblins that are stood in front of this fortified hill, I suppose you'd call it. Interesting column of stone. So is Morris going to go up this way? It doesn't look like it, so he's not going to take this path. He's going to instead go around. I mean, it's a long way to march before he's going to be able to get into position to attack Imladris, but the snow trolls are acting as a bit of a minesweeper, perhaps fearful that there could be cavalry elements around the outside of the map. Heavy goblin infantry are there, but they will have to tussle with the Umbar forces first and foremost. Are they going to attack downhill here with the Balakathak's Guard? I think they are, and the goblins see that they are, so they're going to retreat. I mean, if the Balakathak's Guard chase them too far into the open field, they're going to get surrounded and crushed by the horde. And that is looking like it could happen. Impetuous indeed from the Axe Guard. They are going to turn around here. Axes raised. I mean, the initial fight here is certainly going to go the way of the Balakathak's Guard, but cycle charging in and out with infantry has never really been worth it for me in Medieval 2. You can see they're already shaken because of the amount of goblins that are here, but the problem is when you're an infantry unit, when you turn around and go to run away from a unit, you're going to take far more damage than a unit of cavalry would, so it never really works. Shock infantry really, the high charge helps initially, but after that, what you really need to do is just leave them in melee as just a high damage, slightly lower defense infantry unit for me. Very rare that cycle charging with infantry tends to work, but he has gone back to a narrower part of the map. Going to be here, holding on against this heavy goblin infantry. And the artillery starts to do its work as well. Good hits there on Eclipse's Goblin Horde. A couple of the Balakathak's Guard left behind, and they will be torn up. Yeah, the heavy goblin infantry. The halberds getting into melee will make life a little bit more tricky for the Umbar axemen here. again, some decent hits. A lot of these units are fairly spaced out, so it's certainly not the end of the world for Eclipse, but there are plenty of dead orcs and goblins on the field now. Meanwhile, some of these snow trolls have been bloodied, so that makes me believe that maybe some arrows from the top of the hill were loosed upon them. Yeah, there must be. I can hear the elven war cry of Illidan. Yeah, Elder and my archers trying to shoot into Morris's army as they move across. Several of those arrows are probably hitting the dirt right in front of them, but those that do hit, it's going to be a long time before Morris can get into melee, and he will be damaged by the time that he does. Balak Axguard once again getting out of melee range. A little bit of friendly fire. A lot of friendly fire. Time to stop using the trebuchet now, because the angle is such that you're actually far more likely to hit your own men and the Umbar right in front of you. The prize, if you do hit the goblins, will probably be a pretty significant rout. They're already winded after all. Umbar trying to move backwards, seeing that the trebuchet could maybe be a bit of a problem. Ardenheim Shield Guard were the ones that took the losses as well, which is a little bit unfortunate for Umbar, because they are going to be a fantastic unit to hold the line. Not the most damaging by any means, but really, really good defensively with that armour and those shields. As the goblins trudge their way into melee. Forward come the cave trolls as well, so the cave trolls will be able to just bust through these spears, maybe get into all of the pikes that are in behind. They may not be as tanky as other trolls, but they're still going to really do a hefty amount of damage indeed to pikemen, who are actually rolling forward up onto the front line now anyway. The cave trolls will want to avoid stuff like the Balak Axguard like the plague. Speaking of which, in comes a unit of them. That's the kind of unit that trolls really don't want to be getting involved with. There are these black orcs of the mountains, made of sterner stuff than the goblins that are around them, certainly. Now that is some good hits from the trebuchet there. I think that's going to be enough to cause a bit of a rout. Indeed it is. The Misty Mountains doing what they do best and panicking in the face of such ults. So Umbar will be very pleased with that. Risking friendly fire here, but so far it has paid off. Misty Mountains continue to move forward. There's some casualties inflicted on Morris's army, but it's nothing too bad. And Angmar are also going to be on their way across. Joran's army is going to be also slowly making its way into position to help out the forces of Imladris. Balak guys continuing to try and cycle in and out, but even more so in this situation because you're just cycling into the back of your own men, it's not really going to work out. But perhaps he feels as though we can just take the Axemen off the front line for a little while, try and make it so that we lose as few of these armour-piercing infantrymen against these goblins as we possibly can, because the Belagai units will be more than sufficient to deal with heavy goblin infantry, especially now that the halberdiers have abandoned them. They're not going to have any sort of anchor on this front line. The axes are now going to come back onto the front line as well, which should only hasten the demise of these foul creatures. Meanwhile, they are going to maybe move up onto this area as well. Looks like Angmar are going to be the ones taking the lead there. Once again, the trebuchet firing out, hitting the Mountaineer at coast in the background over there. Eclipse going to be on his own by the looks of things. For the most part, trying to take the most direct route up the hill. Umbar will be quite happy with that. While it is a numerous Misty Mountains army, you would think that they should be able to bottle them up. That was a really good hit as well, right into the heart of things over there. Nope, Froggy is going to send over some of his Angmar to help, which is certainly for the best, I think. Orkfella's taking a hit from that trebuchet though. That armour piercing will be sorely needed against Umbar. Angmar marauders coming forward in great numbers. The heavy goblin spears are routing. They will come back, but they're going to be ever more fragile here. The cave trolls getting into position as well. That's really, really devastating. There's only so much that this artillery is going to be capable of doing. That catapult still waits. Trebuchet could actually have been the catapult, to be honest. Wasn't looking properly. It could have been either of them based on position. And trebuchets don't have the most ammunition, it is worth saying. As Morris's army continues to make progress around here, and he is going to be heading up via this pathway. I say via this pathway, he's just going to have to go right the way around down here and then with Joran. Is that a pathway up? That is incredibly steep, if so. It must be, because the elves are already waiting for them. And they're continuing to shoot at Morris's army. Are we seeing the first forays up the hill over here as well? We are. The Womb Raiders Angmar army Going to be leading the way with some Orc Fellas and Angmar Marauders. Try and put some extra pressure onto the Umbar position, which is going to be needed here because so far Umbar will be very pleased with their day's work on this front line over here. Yet more routing, huge amount of routing from the Heavy Goblin Halberds and Angmar Marauders. The Umbar front line continuing to do its thing. That though is an attacking piece of artillery. Wasn't it? Yes, there it is over there. Froggy's Angmar catapult trying to get a good angle to hit the Umbar infantry forces. Still not a lot in terms of quality on this front line. The Black Uruks were here. Maybe something like the Gundabad Guard wouldn't go amiss, just to try and make it so that this attack doesn't fall apart every time the artillery starts to fire. More units that presumably have returned from routing that Eclipse is going to send right back into the meat grinder, as is the way of things when you are playing as the Misty Mountains. Meanwhile, Umbar also going to have to get down to business over here as well, now that this Angmar force is putting pressure on the front line. Yes, it's armor-piercing units in here with the Orc Fellows, but the sheer quality of the Alcarondas Legion is going to be far too much for these basic Angmar units to handle. There's also Corsair Fencers in close proximity. The Balakith Shield Bearers will help out against the heavier Angmarim units with those maces that they wield. The Angmar Marauders coming back in as well, but so far Umbar will be pleased. Balakith Shield Bearers pushing in, but in so doing some of the Orcs have actually managed to penetrate the lines. I don't know how long these Angmar Marauders will necessarily last in this position, but we'll have to wait and see. Over on the other side of things, really nasty position this, as the Eldarenway archers fire into Morris's position. This is going to be a little bit more like it. These units will be wasting their ammunition, but more of them will be hitting than not, and I feel as though the shot is so good you can't really waste that opportunity. That's a double layered Elven Spear Ball. There is another way up here as well by the looks of things, which Numenor themselves are actually marshalling, so I don't know if Joran's going to send over a little force to try and occupy that line as well. So far the defenders will be fairly pleased with how this has gone. That is a lot of crispy units. Is that the Mangonel? I suppose it must have been the Mangonel, just based on the fact that it's burning units in that fashion, and there's no way it could be the Witches. One of the Mangonels, both the Mangonels actually now fall. Mavin seeing it as a worthwhile target, and I would agree, you don't want the Mangonel to hit your front line. While I think the Mangonel targeting this area would probably be more devastating to the Misty Mountains themselves because of the morale crushing effect that the Mangonel has, you can't really afford to take too many losses at the hands of artillery. Here we go, the classic scenario lag coming back in. It's been a while since we've seen a scenario cause lag like this. Hopefully it is a temporary thing. Guardians of Kharn Doom pushing in. Mavin going to commit forward more Alcarondas Legion to the front line. Heavy Goblin Spears have pushed through, but Balakith Marksmen and Alcarondas Legion are ready to meet them, so they're not going to last for too much longer. The pikes are a little bit scattered, which might be a little bit of a problem for Umbar if the attackers continue to try and push forward units over here. Yeah, Mountain Uruk Host are pushing up the hill. Oof. Yep. This is a Horton scenario, isn't it? That frame rate, though. But yes, Angmar are going to be pushing forward, going to try and continue to put real pressure on Umbar, who of all the defending factions have certainly done the most heavy lifting so far, but you'd have to imagine that they're going to be the first ones to fall by the wayside when the attacker numbers really start to take their toll on the Umbar infantry. Forward come Angmar Trolls. It's going to be a problem for the Alcarondas Legion. Pikes are not really the answer. Nara and Iron Sentinels are coming down. There's also some Numenorian cohort from Numenor, which will be a little bit better. High attack values for line infantry such as themselves. Well, let's head over to the other side. Are we going to start to see the beginnings of the attack on the Imladris part of the front line as well? I would assume the answer is yes, and indeed we are seeing that. Probably why the frame rate is so appalling when you zoom in on these fights. The fact that there are 3 large battles happening all at once on the field. Snow Trolls and Cave Trolls on the front line, but the Cave Trolls are not going to be able to push their way through a front line this dense, and the Elves will be able to hold on to this front line for quite a while, I think. There's a lot of Eldarenway in here, so the Trolls are going to start to fall away at the hands of the Sword Masters pretty quickly. defeat seems certain. Blackback Mountain Berserkers being committed forward. If they're seen, they will surely attract the attention of some of those Elven archers. If they don't, though, they will be useful on the front line. They'll be one of the few Misty Mountains units that can genuinely do quite a lot of damage to these Elven defenders. The trolls can as well, but they're going to fall away very, very quickly. Probably not a big fan of fighting in the daylight, that bunch. Right, let's see what's happening over here, because this was looking a little bit more as if those trolls could push their way through, and the Blackwatch Legion are doing that now as well, so they mean business over here, Angmar. They want this Umbar front line to be forced onto the defensive as quickly as it possibly can be. The trolls are running through. I mean, the fencers will do a fair amount of damage to the trolls, but they're going to try and get in position to silence those Corsair blackguards and prevent them from using their ammunition. So this has been a really successful push so far from the Angmar. Very well done to them. Meanwhile, over here, I can hear the artillery pieces getting destroyed. So presumably we're seeing a bit of counter fire from the attackers now as well. Yeah, this front line is definitely the worst defender. They are shooting into it with the artillery, but that is going to be very short-lived. Eclipse is going to send forward another full unit of Black Uruks to the mountains. They're not pushing through with quite the same gusto as the Angmar on the other front, but actually I take that back. They've managed to get in behind enemy lines. They've found a gap in the side, and now Mountain Orc Berserkers are here. A locked morale unit, I believe, because they are Berserkers. And this is something which is very useful for the Misty Mountains, because so many of their other units are susceptible to routing, so to have the Mountain Orc Berserkers in here being the ones to take advantage of the fact that this front line is now compromised means that you're not going to be able to get rid of them without killing all of them, which will take far more time than routing simple heavy goblins. Also, the armor piercing is a nice bonus for them against Umbar forces. Yeah, they're going to need to pull back here, I think. This front line is doomed. If they can save the Naren Iroh Guard and some Balakith marksmen for later, that will certainly help their cause. Still quite a lot of Alcarondas Legion rotting meat being used, which, again, probably going to be more damaging for the Orcs, even though they should enjoy it. It's the mechanics of the game. Umbar, on the other hand, their morale is substantial. We're going to leave that front line because of how low the frames are getting. Even over here, though, things, well, as you know, over here it's more or less okay. But that's probably because Umbar are now going to be in full retreat, or attempting to be in full retreat. A lot of these units are probably going to end up routing. Very good use of the trolls there from Froggy. There are some Numenorian cohort over here as well, but as soon as they arrived, they were pretty much crushed underfoot. They arrived at really the wrong time, when things were really starting to turn against Umbar on this front line. So a change in tactic is going to be required, as the hillside is going to get slowly but surely covered with orcs, and Numenor need to be aware of this because they've got Belagair archers waiting. Looks like they're out of ammunition, but they're hidden in the trees, but this is the pathway that those Angmar forces are going to take ultimately. Several front lines still waiting. Trebuchet in position, attacking artillery over on the other side. Imladris units, yeah, we're seeing another push up here as well, so Joran is going to take on the responsibility of trying to push up this hill as well. A lot of heavy goblins. Again, the Numenorians stand firm. Blackback Mountain Berserkers making their way in. So yeah, the Belagair archers will actually be very, very useful for helping to burn them down. Yeah, this is the problem for Numenor. They're going to need more on this front line. And once again, the attackers wisely looking to see if these front lines have got any sort of gaps in them. Pharazim Swordmaster has been taken away from the front line, which is interesting. If they had remained, it would have been far more difficult for the Misty Mountains to batter this defensive position down. Let's go and see what's happening with Imladris, who have concentrated their forces far more than Numenor and Umbar have. But I mean, look at this is a real mess at this point. Imladris continuing to hold on, but can they hold on indefinitely against this number of orcs? I'm not so sure about that one. I mean, these Norrtuno warriors got a perfect firing angle, really. Point blank. Elven arrows, even basic elven archers like this, are going to be quite capable of doing a decent amount of damage. Imagine if a unit of rangers was here. The entire army could get deleted. Ooh, and the Drake Broodling is going to move forward. They're going to try and push through. I mean, their mass is such that they are forcing the whole front line back. And it looks as though they are going to be able to penetrate the front line as well. So once again, really good use of using their numbers and their mass. The Drake Broodlings at the heart of things, and plenty of infantry around to help support this push. And all of a sudden it's turning a bit ugly for Numenor. Some Norröna warriors who are good in melee were trying to come in to help support this line, but it's too little too late. And now some more Imladris units as well. Imladris Guardians are coming in, they are going to charge. This is where the Drake Broodlings will start to fall away. And they can be such a weird unit to see use, the Drake Broodlings. But on that occasion, that's pretty much the most useful thing you could do with a unit like that on a map like this. A lot of routing going on from the Goblins as well, but it's certainly worthwhile considering all the gains they've made, and there's plenty of reinforcements they can send forward as well. The Mountain Uruk host and Black Uruks made of sterner stuff. It's a real mess now, fighting erupting all across the hillside, which you'd have to say is good news for the attackers. Chaos is going to much favour them in a scenario like this. The Trebuchet has been exploited now. I don't know how much ammunition the Trebuchet had left necessarily, so I don't know how big of a loss it actually is for Horton, but you know, one Trebuchet volley can make all the difference in the world, and the Trolls taking them on. Heavy Goblin infantry also fighting against them. Pharazim Swordmasters, maybe this is why they were retreated. They saw the fact that they would not be able to retreat fairly soon. I mean, they're obviously going to butcher what remains of this unit of Mountain Uruk host, but if more units are on the way, there's fighting going on over here as well. Goblin King's Bodyguard and Trolls facing off against the Numenor variant of the Alcarondas Legion, who are surrounded on all sides and ultimately going to lose this fight, but how many can they take down? It has been that transitional phase where the attackers have once again done a really good job against the defenders here. Initially they've done very well, the defenders, when things were regimented and organised and in lines, but as soon as one of their lines fell, things have descended into pandemonium somewhat, and that is most certainly favouring the Orcs. As we said, it's intended to be more of a survival type scenario this, so the attackers do have a rather large advantage right from the outset, and it would be very surprising if the defenders were to win. And based on how well the attackers have done in this transition, I would assume that they're going to go on to win this as a result. And more Berserkers. And they're pushing through here. Drake Broodlings, Black Uruks of the mountains. Presumably they're going to head over here to try and finish off the Elven front line. This is where Master Blaster needs to have some good battlefield awareness. Looks though he's committing more to this front line, which is all well and good, but he's about to get attacked from the rear if Joran comes over to help out Morris. Morris is also not exactly messing around. He's got some White Uruk Fearmongers on the front line. That armour-piercing Phalanx is going to be useful against all of these armour-clad elves. Yet more Imladris Guardians being committed to the front line. I mean, I'm sure that the Misty Mountains have taken horrendous losses trying to attack Imladris up hills up like this. And if this continued, Imladris would probably win, but you can see the Blackback Mountain Berserkers from Joran are already on the way. Some Spears of Rivendell and the Gwaith Arthan coming across to try and block the way. Gwaith Arthan not necessarily the best unit to use against the Blackbacks, though. More of a defensive unit. Blackback's far more aggressive. 4 Norröna warriors now running for the hills. And Imladris being attacked from this angle as well. Those Black Uruks from Eclipse, though, getting demolished by the Gwaith Myrdain, another unit of Gwaith Arthan, and all of these. I mean, this is a lot of high quality Imladris units that he has at his disposal. So yeah, this flanking move is not going to go all that well, but it does go to show all of the avenues the defenders are going to have to try and hold on to. And the attackers have got plenty of numbers to at least put up a token effort on all of them. Whereas I'm not sure that is a luxury the defenders are going to have. Mountain Uruk host pouring up the hillside as well, led by the Goblin King's Bodyguard. Bold move to commit them and your general. The loss of generals, especially for the Misty Mountains armies involved here, could yet be one of those things which is fairly decisive. And they're not going to enjoy being in melee against something like the Gwaith Myrdain. Meanwhile, things have now a little bit more organised for Numenor over here. There's only one way up that the Angmar can take now. Numenorian steel bows raining death down upon all of these units. What are they actually firing at, though, is a... I mean, they're firing at a whole bunch of units. Could be any of them, really. Numenorian front line, though, continuing to hold on for the time being. And Numenorian shield guard, that armour piercing will help them against these trolls, which have been so useful for Angmar up until this point. In fact, one of the trolls, once again, has managed to get through over here. Belagire archers firing in. This is going to be costly for the Orcs once again, but it's a price, I'm sure, they will be willing to pay just to try and keep the momentum up, but Numenor, much as Umbar did in the earlier stages of the battle, standing firm over here for now. What about the elves? A little bit less clear for the elves, given how many more choke points they have to hold on to. It's going fairly well for them on this one, quite the Arthand and Myrdain. Now having to move, presumably to reinforce a different area, quite the Arthand. Yeah, you can see Drake Broodling smashing through here. Based on the fact that the Gwaith the Arthand are already retreating, I get the feeling that Imladris made the executive decision to pull back. Can they pull back in time though? Can they have an orderly retreat? I'm not sure they can. I don't think they're going to be able to. I mean, the Drake Broodlings are very quick. They're going to charge in, surely blocking at least some of the Imladris retreat. I mean, the Gwaith Myrdain in melee will surely do a good job against them, as will the Gwaith the Arthand, but good use of trolls and Drake Broodlings, the more monstrous elements of the evil armies, have been the key to their success in pushing through these defensive positions so far. As the Gwaith the Arthand try to leave, but are they going to be allowed to? Elder Runway Archers, these black orcs looking like they might rout, but just look at the orcs swarming through the trees over there. The clock is ticking to try and get these Imladris units away, and I think Master Blaston may have dawdled a little bit too long, and as a result he's going to lose a few Elder Runway and a fair amount of Gwaith the Arthand, which is a big loss to have. When you're the defenders, they're so tough that every one lost is going to be a tragedy as the Whiter at Fearmongers try to punish them for their trespasses. Meanwhile, God Helene trying to use their Silver Thorns to good effect, slow the advance down, but how much damage are they really going to be able to do in this situation? Now then, over here, things still going okay for Numenor. Guardians of Khan Doom still on the front line. Going to push forward. Now is the time to try and use their Witch-Round Pikemen. Try and have some sort of response to the hefty amount of Numenorian pikes that you see in here, including the mighty Naruna Aru Sentinels. Some sword masses ready to be committed as well. Balakith Marksmen continuing to fire. Umbar, of course, much more depleted now, but still with a part to play in this battle. Angmar Marauders back there as well, still plenty of numerous units, and just look at that. Flooding forwards. The Gwaith the Arthand at the heart of the efforts to hold on to this narrow choke point, which Imladris absolutely should. This is probably one of the better choke points you can have at this stage in the battle, because you have an opportunity to shoot into the side, which Horton is taking with his steel bows. But also it's a narrow choke point, so it's going to be far more difficult for the attackers to push through in the manner that they have done so far. God Helene continuing to fire some Balagar Archers. If they're out of ammunition, just to have more mass on the front line would be the key here. Balakith Marksmen heading over there as well. They've still got another front line which they could pull back to, and I think that is a singular front line, I want to say. Yeah, so ultimately in their final stand there is only going to be the one front line, which will help out the defenders quite a lot, but I'm just not sure. I think the key moment in this fight for me, between the fall of the first and second lines, the attackers really made that pay for themselves. It's going to be about sheer quality at this point, and once again the attackers are trying to use that mass. Froggy moving forward with his Blackwatch Legion to try and buckle the Numenorian front line, and you have to say he's having a decent amount of success at doing that. Pushing up the hill with Guardians of Khan Doom, which Scourge Raiders trying to get into a position to use their throwing axes. I'm not sure whether they have the best of shots, but I mean they may as well go for it. You're never going to have an ideal shot as the attackers, and any kill you can get at this point is going to be a bonus. The Angmar players have done really well here, as have the Misty Mountain players at being that, well, a huge mass of foul creatures. Balagar Archers thinking of joining the front line. The elves are actually pushing forward, which is not a good idea. You need to have yourself in guard mode so this doesn't happen. Because as you push forward, you're going to end up getting yourself surrounded, and even the mighty Gwaith the Arthand are thinking of routing here as a result of this. Bit of a mistake there, you have to say. Same thing happens when you're trying to defend gatehouses in Medieval 2. It's one of the first things you learn, really. Ooh. The attacking artillery getting a really nice hit there into that group of Numenorian steel bows. Perhaps the more limited ammunition of the steel bows has actually turned out to be a bit of a bad thing for the defenders as well, because the thing that the attackers have really in their favour is their numbers, which they've really leveraged quite a lot in this battle so far. And the steel bows are more about killing quality units more so than quantity. So it could be, in spite of their really high damage and the armour piercing that comes along with it, actually wasn't all that useful in the end. Belagair archers pulling back, trying to pull back as much as they can. Might be worth trying to pull back a unit of Gwaithir Myrdain as well. Otherwise it's only going to be a matter of time before this Imladris front line gets recharged. That frame rate is absolutely appalling. Like the scenarios of old. At least there's more of a reasonable frame count in a scenario like this. When the frames tanked in the old days, when I had scenarios like this and it was like 50,000 frames, it was sort of a moment where your heart sinks as you realise what is to come. Still raining down some arrows on the Angmar as they push forward. I mean, there's still the Pharazim Swordmasters and Naira Arrow Sentinels, but there is a gap now, a significant one, which is being exploited. Goblin King's Bodyguard leading the way, Guardians of Khan Doom are in amongst here, Gundabad Guard. There were some Angmar Marauders as well, I'm pretty sure, so plenty of units here doing the business. Numenorian steel bows pulling out their swords now, swords and shields, trying to do their bit in melee as we enter the final 10k frames, which soon enough we'll be seeing the final choke point, I'm sure, and the Belagair archers are not going to be permitted to retreat. So they are going to have to stand, fight, and ultimately die in melee with fully upgraded Guardians of Khan Doom. And it's also only a matter of time before this Elven front line falls. I think at this point it's fairly clear the attackers are almost certainly going to win this fight. Those transitional phases have been too much for the defenders to bear. The real question is, how many can they kill before they fall? What would constitute a secondary victory for the defenders here, as the Orcs continue to push their way forwards? Still plenty of just basic Angmar units, so I suppose killing the generals and causing a chain rout isn't completely beyond the realms of possibility, but that really is the only hope at this point, as the arrows continue to flow overhead. If they're going after the catapult at this point, it's too late to really bother with that. You need to be shooting into the infantry. They represent an even greater threat to you at this stage. They're an Iron Guard in a good position to fire. Really nice looking unit, the creme de la creme of the Black Numenorian society. He's trying to use fire arrows, so clearly he sees the fact that trying to crush the attacker's morale is probably the way to go in this situation. Well, those units are very tired. Goblin King's Bodyguard are here. Bit of a hit on the steel bows, enough to rout them actually. Things were already looking pretty bleak, so a grazing hit was enough to cause them to run for the hills. Belagair archers shaken. That elven front line continues to fight the good fight, as it were. The elven hammers and swords raining blows down upon the Misty Mountains attackers over here. But they are going to get surrounded and destroyed, and I think this is the last of the units that Imladris have to offer. Numenorian steel bows routing. These Belagair archers, the longer they can fight, the longer Imladris will be safe, but they're wavering, and I can't imagine the arrival of the Gundabad Guard does indeed cause the out of ammunition entry-level archers to break. Artillery just about sailing over the heads of the Iron Guard. Pharazim Swordmasters and Numenorian cohort, so yeah, now with they're going to get attacked in the back. God Helene are going to turn around to try and meet this flanking move, but it's better than just getting charged in the back en masse, I suppose. Victory still seems certain for the Elven Warhammers as well, so it's definitely worthwhile just for Imladris to try and make life as awkward as possible here. for the attackers. Units still getting in the way. Yeah, look at this, there's not really much left of this front line now. Still some Pharazim Sword Mercers, 31 of them, the Numenor Sentinels, but there simply isn't going to be enough of them. And the Orcs will destroy them, this ocean of Orcs that still is alive. Although I have to say, these giant blobs which have formed are at this point really the only thing that the Orcs have left to them, so they need to hope that they don't suffer any form of chain rout, otherwise it could get a little bit questionable in the late game. God Helene and some Eldarenway archers fighting uphill now. Witchram Scourge Raid is going to fire right into the back of this front line there. So the attackers once again doing everything right, and in a 5v3 scenario where it's already unlikely you'll win, if the attackers do everything right, it's so difficult for the defenders to win. But this is how the scenario was designed after all. Guardians of Khan Doom, a full strength unit of them, the Imladris Guardians turning around, but the more units they take off this front line, the more likely it is that the attackers will simply push their way through over here. Only a single unit really of Gwaithir Myrdain and some very battered units that are left. Snow Troll moves forward, taking his life into his hands. One hit from those mighty elven hammers and he's probably going to end up falling. It's almost like the Orcs are queuing up. I mean, it's such a narrow choke point that it was the right area to defend. I don't necessarily agree with taking those Imladris Guardians off that front line. Yes, they were getting attacked in the back by those Witchram Scourge Raiders, but I mean, I guess they're doomed no matter what they do here in Imladris. Just a case of hoping they can get as many kills as possible, but even in the best case scenario at this point, it's looking pretty grim for the Numenorians that are occupying the summit of the hill. Speaking of which, Balakith Marksman moving down here to stop the Witchram Scourge Raiders from simply skirmishing the Numenorian front line down. Forced into action once again. Umbar taking up their weapons. Around the Witchram Blackguard, freshly committed as well. The entirety of Angmar now being thrown forwards to try and bring about an attacker victory once and for all. Imladris Guardians, defeat is almost a certainty, now surrounded on all sides, the Angmar further up the hill, and the Goblins and Orcs of the Misty Mountains down the hill. There's good use of the Witchram Scourge Raiders there to make quick work of what remained of the Imladris offerings on the field today. Don't know what necessarily is going on over there. Oh, it's not a defending piece of artillery, of course, it's an overshot from the other side. Still some God Halim in here as well. Still fighting on, but wavering. And completely unsurprising, there's Blackback Mountain Berserkers in there as well.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Oof. Most unfortunate. Very nice hit there from the artillery. Numenor continue to be bullied. Cave Trolls. Push forward, Guardians of Khan Doom. Now turning around, seeing that Imladris well and truly in hand at this point. Surprised they haven't routed already actually, but Imladris are made of very tough stuff. That one Snow Troll is still alive. I hope he manages to live to the end of the battle, to be honest with you. Having been so involved in melee fights against the High Elves. This front line waits for its opportunity to at least try and make something happen. For the defenders, try and do their bit. The Numenor Royal Guard very depleted, but every little helps. Going to try and just do as much damage as they can with what arrows they have left. Having a look. Yeah, very much an attacker victory in the making here. Before everyone complains and moans in the comments about that as well, that is how the scenario was designed. It was meant to be extremely difficult for the defenders, and ultimately the defenders, when they made their errors in that phase earlier on between the first and second lines, they sealed their fate ultimately. So don't go complaining at me. People complaining at me as if I have something to do with the creation of these things and it was all my fault. Angmar Marauders. Waiting for their opportunity. May as well go up to ×2 speed here, actually. Given the lay of the land. Yes, defeat does seem almost certain. Glad that the announcer was here to tell us that. I was really going to be struggling with that for a moment there. The Naru Sentinels are here. The Royal Legion of Armanelos on the front line. But I would imagine this is going to end in much the same way as the defences have up until this point. The attackers will move forward in numbers, the front line will start to creak and buckle under the weight of all the orcs that are here. And then in the chaos, there goes the Elven General. At least killed by a Blackback Berserker, so a worthy foe. Oof. That attacking artillery has been very effective as well. So the RNG gods clearly favouring the attackers on this occasion. Actually, was that defending artillery? No, it wasn't. Sailing over the top of the mountain, those Pharazim Swordmasters. At this point, you may as well commit everything. There's no real sense in leaving anything in reserve. Just throw everything in, see what this front line can do. You're going to need the mass, honestly, on the front line anyway. Otherwise, you will suffer a very similar fate. Maybe a few too many examples of mass pushing units in this scenario. Too many Blackwatch Legion, too many Trolls, Drake Broodlings. It's very difficult for the defenders to do anything about that, even in a battle where they're intended to have more of a chance. And we've seen the reason as to why they can be so brutally effective in this battle. There's nothing wrong with them before anyone starts pointing that out individually as units. But undoubtedly this one is going to get a few thumbs down purely because the elves of Imladris were on the losing side. And people really do get their panties in a bunch when that is the case. But the attackers have done everything right. They have merely done their job. And success is going to be theirs on this occasion. Yes, there shall be blood this day, and there has been blood this day. And the orcs already are filtering their way through into the backfield, going after the Numenorian steel bows. Mountaineer at coast, very depleted Blackback Mountain Berserkers as well. The Royal Legion of Armanelos, a very good looking unit. I think I prefer them stylistically to the Pharazim Swordmasters, honestly. I'm not really a big fan of the sword model that the Pharazim Swordmasters use. It's too chunky. Wouldn't be out of place in Skyrim or something like that. It needs to be more sleek for me. I also just like the armour design of the Royal Legion of Armanelos. Forward push the Ultram Scourge Raiders and Guardians of Kharndoon. Over here, elves. Numenorian steel bows. Gonna have to do their bit in melee. It's gonna be the end. How are the elves still saying that? Is there an elven unit in here? One elf, perhaps? Doesn't look like it. So of course there are fences over there. There's one troll waddling around at the top of the hill. He's probably extremely happy with himself. One mountaineer at coast over there as well. But it's good to see Horton making scenarios again. Made a lot of scenarios back in a couple of years back. Hopefully we'll start to see a few more, especially with the new patch, hopefully fairly imminent. I feel like I've been mentioning that for over a year now, but we shall speak no more of such things. And just say that hopefully that will be coming soon, and with it, I'm sure that it will get people's creative juices flowing. Look at him, look. Very pleased with himself, sat at the top of the hill. At least the top of the hill that units can get to. Can't make it up there. Their fate is very sealed. Look at this guy, look. Can a cave troll be contemplative as he looks out over the horizon? As his hand and his tree trunk covered in blood. Thinking about his place in the universe, perhaps? We can only hazard a guess. I believe it was said as well that this battle ultimately ended in a crash, which probably wouldn't surprise me given how demanding scenarios such as this are. Again, in terms of sheer amount of units on the field, this is probably one of the most demanding battles I've done, to be honest, with all, even stuff like the Mountaineer Host having their unit model counts increased to 200. There goes the Numenorian General. Of course, we won't be able to count them all, but given the amount of orcs, one of the highest amount of orcish attackers we've seen in a battle since I started my channel, it's always going to be tough for the defenders. Ultimately they were found wanting. But the troll, he's had enough of thinking about his life, and now he's going to get back to his day job, which is smashing people around with a tree trunk.
Our army is tiring.
Yeah, and this is going to be it. We are ultimately going to see this is the end of the battle. Some blue triangles that routed did manage to rout away from the hill, so ultimately not all of them ended up falling by the wayside, but it is of course an attacker victory. You can't even say that any sort of secondary objectives were achieved by the defenders, I think, because it would have been over 20% of the force that the attackers still had remaining to them. I mean, to be fair, this is all they had left, but it's a lot of orcs on display, but I mean, they had an enormous army, as was said. So yeah, big thank you to Horton for sending this battle to me. Hopefully he's going to make a couple more scenarios as well in this period, because there was a scenario he made a while back, which again was his return after a bit of an absence, and this is kind of the same thing again. So I wonder if the same thing is going to happen, where he's made this one scenario and then disappears for like a year or so before making another one, or whether he's going to make a couple more before he goes back into hibernation once more. But yeah, this was very much like a scenario of old, considering the frame rates tanking a little bit when all of the orcs were piling forwards, and yeah, it just had that feel to it. So a bit of a throwback, really. And well played to the attackers. Like, they did everything correctly, and given the odds that were against the defenders in the first place, it was always going to be hard for them. Like, you can't really hold it against them too much, given what they were facing. So yeah, I think you have to give them a fair amount of credit for how they went about their business on this occasion. As for what's going to be coming next, I do have a scenario from Morris, which I want to be doing. Again, that Arthur Dane, Cardland, Rudauer split Arnor scenario that he's got going on, which he has sent me, so that will probably be fairly soon. I've also been given a couple of other battles as well, including a free-for-all. It's been a while since we've done a free-for-all, so I think we will probably end up doing that one fairly soon as well. But yeah, there's a few more on the list that I will be working my way through. Always happy to accept more, of course. But yeah, by the time this one comes out, it will be getting on from... It will be September, I believe, so early September. September through to October, the second half of September through to the middle of October is when my next big trip away could be. So I'm really trying to record as many as I can to try and see my way through that while I'm away. Could be that I have to drop back down to one video a week, as I feared, but it could be far more temporary than I thought, so there is that. There's not really much else I can say about the schedule at this point. As for my plans to get new hardware, I was hoping that would be October, but I may have to push that back to maybe November or December. Worst case scenario, possibly January 2022, just because of how everything is lining up and how, you know, I need to be careful with my expenditure. As much as the weird thing is about it, I will actually, because I earn a small amount of money from YouTube, I am actually incentivized to buy new hardware, because it means that I won't have to pay tax on the money that I earn from YouTube, weirdly enough, because it counts as a secondary income, and I need new hardware in order to continue to do it, so they would actually be willing to not tax me on money as long as I pay for the hardware. It's kind of weird. But yeah, I will be doing that, so certainly before April of 2022 I need to do that, otherwise I'll just have to give the money to the government, and I don't particularly want to do that. So it will happen. It just might have to be delayed from when I was going to do it originally in October, November of this year, and instead be through to December, January. Of course, that will coincide with me starting to do a few Rise of Mordor battles as well, and talking about Rise of Mordor a little bit more, because I'll be able to show it off in a better light than I currently can. But yeah, I feel as though I'm waffling a little bit at this point. So, big thank you to Horton for sending me this battle replay and for creating this scenario. Hopefully you make a few more before you disappear into the ether once again. Big thank you to all of the players that were a part of this battle replay. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.